Welcome to the final of these beginner series challenges for 2022. So this time we're looking at how the pupils of the prep school travel to school. So we have two data sets this week, but you might notice already from the solution that I haven't actually used this second data set. So this data set that's come through all the other week's challenges that gives us information about the pupils and their parents. Actually, it didn't seem like that was necessary for this challenge, looking at the output data required. So actually this is one that I've ignored, and that's a good lesson in, working out what data it is you need from what tables, because you'll often have more data than you need, working out what is relevant for your analysis. So only this data set here, which records for each student how they travelled into school on each day of the week. So we're going to start off by doing a pivot, so pivoting these days of the week down into one column. So just by doing a columns to rows pivot, dragging over each of those 5 fields and renaming it to weekday and method of travel. But as you can see, for example, with bicycle and bicycle spelt with a Y, we've got some tidy up, some cleaning up to do of this field. So we go to our grouping stage. So I chose to use the method of grouping values by pronunciation. I found that worked quite well, and then I just tidied up the remaining ones. So if I go into the edit here to just expand that there, then there were a couple that I know that I had to bring in. So for example, for walk, I think it was walk split into 2 groups. It split into like walk spelt this way correctly, and then walk spelt with 2 L's, for example. So I just needed to find the extra values that I needed to come into this walk field so that it worked out how we wanted it to. So a little bit manual, a little bit using the pronunciation. Okay, next up, I was looking to create that sustainable field. So we could have done this by writing an if calculation and specifying which ones were sustainable and which weren't in a long if calculation, but I thought that sounds like a lot of typing out. I'd rather duplicate this field here, my method of travel, which is what I did, and then I selected the ones that were non-sustainable, so airplane, car, holding down control at the same time, helicopter, van, and I grouped those values together. So I clicked the group values button up here and then just renamed them to be sustainable and not sustainable. So that's how I chose to do the grouping to create that sustainability field. You could have written an if calculation as well, as I say. Okay, so next up we were doing the grouping, so group by the sustainable field, group by the weekday, group by the method of travel, and then count distinct the student ID to find out how many students are making the trip like that. So renamed that number of trips, that count of student ID. And then to get this trips per day field, I used a fixed level of detail calculation, so grouping on the weekday and summing up the number of students there to get the trips per day, which will be 1,000 for every single row there. And then finally, we want to work out that percentage. So the number of trips divided by the trips per day is going to equal that percentage trips per day. So rounding that to 2 decimal places and performing that division. And that's all that we had to do for this challenge. So a little bit of pivoting, a little bit of aggregating, a few calculations and grouping, and we're done. Hopefully you enjoyed this challenge, and thanks very much for watching.